Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. Today I'm going to be showing you how I painted a rat warrior for Burrows and Badgers. This is actually a Northumbrian Tin Soldiers miniature from their Guardians of the Riverbank collection, but the techniques that I'm showing you here will also work for the miniatures from Mice and Mystics or even Skaven from Games Workshop. So what I've done is I've started with a spray black undercoat, which is what I do with most of my painting. And then I'm going to start with leather brown on the fur. I'm dealing with the fur first because I'm going to be doing some overbrushing, some wet brushing, and it makes sense to do that when I'm not worried about accidentally getting paint on things that I've already painted. So I'm going to apply 2 thin coats to the fur at this stage to get a nice solid base colour to work from, and then that will be a good starting point for when I do the overbrushing later on. And I'm doing the head, the hands and the feet, and I'm not being too careful at the moment because obviously everything else is going to get painted anyway. And that's what I've ended up with. So next I'm going to give that a wash of Agrax Earthshade. That's going to bring out the details, make everything pop, and add texture and definition. And I'm just slopping it on, just making sure it doesn't pull too much in the recesses. You don't want great big globs of the Agrax anywhere. And then when that's completely dry, it's time to do the overbrushing, and for that I'm using Monster Brown from Army Painter. And overbrushing, very much like dry brushing, just with a little bit more paint on the brush, very delicately whipping the brush across the raised surfaces of the miniature, and it's going to pick out all those details. It's going to pick out the knuckles, the tops of the fingers, the ears, any definition on the fur, and things like that. You can do it with dry brushing as well, but you get a dustier finish with dry brushing than you do with wet brushing. And wet brushing, I just think it works a little bit better with fur sometimes. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to do the snout. So I'm using Cadian Fleshtone and I'm mixing it with Lahmian Medium. I'm doing a 50-50 mix for the most part. And I'm just going to layer that mix on across the snout and around the mouth, and add a little bit more Lahmian Medium into it and feather it out towards the back of the snout, where it actually is going to meet the fur that we've already painted, if that makes sense. So sort of feathering it in and just blending it. And you'll probably want 2 coats on the front of the snout. And now we're going to move on to the clothing. So we're going to use Leadbelcher, and I'm thinning my Leadbelcher down slightly so that it runs nicely into the divots of the chainmail armour, just to make sure it goes into all of those recesses and gives a nice solid base coat for that colour. There's not actually a lot of chainmail on this miniature, it's just the sleeves and a little bit at the front. We'll do some more Leadbelcher later on fine details right at the very end. Classic, we're going to use Nuln Oil over the chainmail now. That's going to bring out all those details, bring out all those recesses. And it's just going to make it look a lot nicer. It's going to make it look a lot more defined, less flat and blocky. And I'm also putting a Nuln Oil on the metal sword, except for the handle. And next up, we're going to be using Shining Silver, and we're just going to do a very, very, very light dry brush just on the very, very edge of the chainmail areas, just for a little bit more definition. We're now going to do the tunic, and we're using Army Painter Greenskin here, but you can use whatever greens you have available. You need 2 greens, a darker one and a lighter one. I am going to layer this on in 2 thin coats. It will need 2 thin coats because the green skin doesn't cover very well, and you'll see that as I'm putting it on, it's really not covering that black undercoat very well at all, so it will need 2 coats. And that's what it will look like with the 2 coats applied. And then I'm going to do an Athonian Camoshade, and that's just going to make the green pop a little bit, and it's going to give the recessed definition again. You just need to be careful not to get it over the chainmail or the fur that you've already painted. And you don't need to go to town with it, it's just enough to make the details stand out. And while that is drying, we're going to use Pallid Wych Flesh to pick out the teeth. I've thinned it down ever so slightly, and that's just to make it flow more easily, because you don't want to accidentally get it over bits you've already painted. And then by the time you've done that, your green will be dry, so you can switch to Goblin Green and do the highlighted areas of the tunic. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to pick out the edges of the lapels, and then I'm going to layer it up over the raised details of the tunic. I want this to be quite a bright tunic. I'm trying to do a brighter colour scheme than I would possibly do for other miniature lines, because like I said, I'm using these for Burrows and Badgers, which is quite a bright and breezy game. Next, I'm using Abaddon Black, and that's to pick out the eyes and the nose. And I'm also going to use black on the sleeves and the leggings. So just being very careful not to go over anything that I've already painted. And when that's dry, I'm going to switch to Eshin Grey, and I'm not going to touch the eyes or the nose with Eshin Grey, that's being left completely as is, but I'm going to use Eshin Grey just to layer on over the sleeves and the leggings on the raised areas, and just to provide some more definition, and just to knock it down from a pure matte black, because I don't want it to be a pure matte black. And that's what you will get when they are dry. I'm now going to use oak brown, any dark brown will do, and I'm going to pick out the belt, and there's a little satchel on the rat's waist. So again, just being very careful not to go over the tunic or anything else that I've already painted. And then when that's completely dry, switching to leather brown, just to pick out the edges of the belt and the raised areas of the satchel, just for some definition. Again, so it doesn't look completely flat and bland. And you just have to be really careful with this. I'm not using like insane detail brushes or anything, it's just a small layer brush and a medium layer brush to do all of this. Bugman's Glow is going to be used on the tail, because obviously I want to get sort of a pinky look on the tail. So a thin coat of Bugman's Glow, and then when that's dry, a second coat, just to make sure it's nicely covered. I have thinned all of my paints pretty much as we're doing this. You don't want to use them straight out of the pot and risk them being a bit gloopy and blocking up details. And when that is completely dry, I'm going to do a red tone over the tail, and that's just to make it pinkier. And again, we just need to be careful. You don't want a lot of pooling or anything. We just want to give it that red tint and bring out any of the moulded detail on the tail area. And next, while that's drying, we're going to go back to the Pallid Wych Flesh, and we are just going to thin that Pallid Wych Flesh down so it flows really easily. And now we are switching to an insane detail brush, and we are just going to put a white speck on the top of each of the rat's eyes, and that's just to give like the glisten of the eyeballs and make them look more alive than just black hollow eyes that we had up until now. And then we're going back to Leadbelcher to pick out any other metal details. So that will be the belt buckle and also the 3 buttons on the front of the tunic. And it's just slightly thinned down Leadbelcher and just applied carefully so as not to go over anything that we have already painted. You can see there's 3 buttons on the tunic and then just the outline of the buckle beneath that. We're almost there. We need to go back and finish the tail. So we're going back to Bugman's Glow, and I'm going to use some Lahmian Medium just to thin it out a little bit, make it flow a little bit easier, and just to allow for a little bit of blending. And we're just going to pick out the raised details of the tail. Again, being careful not to go over anything we've already painted. And then we're going to Mechanicus Standard Grey, because our rat is actually finished, so we're going to work on the base. And I'm going to give the base a coating of Mechanicus Standard Grey, which I thinned down slightly, and that just gives me a base colour to work from, so that I can then apply Astrogranite textured paint over the top of that. And then what I've done is I've done a dry brush of Ulthuan Grey. And quite often that's where I would stop with a base like this, but in this case we're going to do a little bit more. So I've got some oak brown, and I'm just going to pick out some areas on the base with oak brown, and these are areas where I'm going to apply some flock, and the brown underneath is just to provide like a dirt base, so that if you see through the flock you'll see brown rather than grey. And then using some PVA glue, just applying the flock like so. I've actually applied a brush on varnish to the miniature before putting the flock on. The flock goes on after the varnish. And that is it. That is our finished rat. Very quick, very simple. It's tabletop quality, and it gets things to the table quickly, and it looks pretty good. I hope you have found this tutorial interesting. Like I say, you can use it for Skaven, you can use it for Mice and Mystics miniatures, things like that. Do please let me know what you think in the comments, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.